rangi whakanui I ngā mahi o Jean Ross. I'll start with karakia for our professorial lecture today. A lot of the karakia with the views at OP are about the morning and starting the day. So I decided to look for something new. This one's talking to how we draw on those who have come before us to help clear the path and set us up so that we can do right going forward together. Kia tau ngā manaakitanga a te mea ngā, ki runga ki tēnā o tātou. Kia mahi te hua, mā kihiki. Kia toi te kupu, toi te mana, toi te aroha, toi te reo mā. Kia tūtū, ka whakamaua, kia tīna, hui e, kia ora. Just like to hand you over to Leanne Schmidt, the Director of Research and Postgraduate Studies, who's going to introduce our speech. Congratulations.
Kia ora koutou. Welcome to each and everyone here tonight. It's a very special event, Professor Jean Ross's inaugural address. Each of these kinds of events bring a community of practice together. In tonight's case, around nursing, and specifically around nursing in a rural context or contexts. I know that Martin is going to introduce Jean tonight, but I have a few comments to make because I work with Jean on a daily basis, and it's a special occasion for Otago Polytechnic, Jean, to have you here tonight. So I'd like to say that Jean plays a central role in the advancement of rural nursing in New Zealand, and also in terms of networking with like-minded researchers and practitioners abroad, specifically in the UK and USA. Jean Ross is an active researcher, a networker, a collaborator, a nursing educator, and a creative innovator. She's known at Otago Polytechnic as an energetic colleague who gets things done. Her contributions and advocacy for nursing in rural contexts and for rurality as a focus are widely known and appreciated here and much further afield. At a time when we hear much about national initiatives and about conglomerated regions, it's easy to lose sight of the immense importance of rural communities, rural needs, rural opportunities and challenges. The small and the far away, the margins as against the centre, are often overlooked and overlooked only at our own peril. Much of New Zealand life and the life of in other countries play out in rural settings. Thank you, Jean, for keeping this front and centre for all of us. Thank you also for your efforts regarding sustainability and for your mentoring contributions to the Doctorate of Professional Practice at Otago Polytechnic. I have encountered your research practice, your care for your learners, your energy, and your sustained contributions in many areas, not least being the editor for quite a number of years now of the journal Scope, Health and Wellbeing. We look forward to your professorial inaugural lecture and to your colleagues' responses, questions and comments a while later. Thank you for doing this for us tonight and for being such a wonderful colleague to work with. And welcome to everybody here tonight. I'm handing over to Martin London.
Kia ora tātou. Ko Tryphon te mana, manga, ko Thames te awa, ko Middle European Jewry te iwi, ko Martin London aha. He tina hari koa koe te mai ki kone I tēnei pō. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. It's an enormous privilege to be here. And to have a chance to introduce Jean, whom I've known for 25 years or more, to those who know her. I take it almost everyone here knows her, and it feels slightly odd to introduce her. However, I'll just say that you may have noticed in my opening the name Tryphon te maunga. And any of you who've had a Zoom teleconference with Jean will have seen this magnificent spiritual, very special mountain in North Wales, in Snowdonia, up behind her head. And I take that as a very much as a guiding mountain. It's my place of peace, and I know Jean is also very attached to it. So more attachments there. So we first met, I've got the number, 28 years ago, Jean, 28 years ago, when together we opened the Centre for Rural Health in Christchurch, based in the Department of General Practice in Christchurch. It was the wonderful Professor John O'Hagan who, when he and I were talking about a Centre for Rural Health to support rural practitioners, said, we need a nurse as well, and I've got one. And Jean and I joined forces. And during that time, the main task was of the Centre for Rural Health was support for our colleagues and to put meaningful education in their way, education which related to rural practice in their communities and in a manner which was participatory. But to get that right, we had to travel, and we started travelling around mainly the remoter parts of Canterbury and Westland, and particularly South Westland. And on these journeys were the time when all the trouble began. Jean met these extraordinary rural nurses working way outside their scope of practice and certainly their training, looking after the remote communities in South Westland. Incidentally, later on, I worked in South Westland along with these nurses, and it was a remarkable experience. But that fired up the beginnings of her fascination and concern with rural nursing. I won't go into great detail of that time. Many of you may know it, and I haven't got long enough. I'm here to do 5 minutes, and I've probably already used 3. From that, Jean started her fundamental research, which has just grown and grown since then. We also created a university diploma of rural health. And in that, interesting, was a paper which we think was a world first, and it was looking at a diploma paper on the sociology of living in rural areas. This is for clinicians, because it's the sociology and the impact on particularly the family life of rural practitioners, which leads to them leaving, and the pressures lead them leaving, rather than the clinical pressures. So we did this paper, and it was called, you have to listen to this, Rural Communities and Team Function. And 2 big words there, communities and team, which anyone who's worked with Jean since then will know have carried on endlessly, almost boringly. It's the community, it's the team, it's working together. But it's absolutely right and on the spot. So it's driven the last 20 years of Jean's research. And during this time, what other things has Jean been doing? Well, she's played a crucial role in creating national networks of rural nurses. She's been going around doing these extraordinary interviews, recording, reflecting, and learning from the stories of rural nurses from around New Zealand, which have contributed to seminal publications now in the international literature. And following on from that, creating with her colleagues the CHASE model, now being used internationally as well. CHASE is Communities Health Assessment Sustainable Education, in which students partner with communities to identify local health needs and then work collaboratively towards sustainable solutions. And I like the word sustainable. You'll find it in anything that Jean has aspired to, and it's vital because when you try to create change, it isn't change unless it's designed to be sustainable. Otherwise, it's simply stirring the pot. Think of the weird sisters at the beginning of the Scottish play. Hubble, bubble, toil and trouble. Bit of that too, actually. I know one Welsh dragon who could give them a run for their money. And now our Welsh dragon is a professor. Congratulations, Jean. I've heard it said the job of a professor is to generate ideas, to fire up arguments, and then surround yourself with talent and put the team to work. Energy and passion, we all heard those words, is what Jean does. I won't elaborate because you all know that perfectly well. But particularly in relation to rural healthcare, she will draw you in, and before you know it, you'll be part of her next project. There will be an endless stream of creative ideas, but watch carefully, because as you engage, they tend to change and morph until you find yourself in a place you never imagined. And believe me, I've been there. I am there. Tomorrow, we spend the whole day tidying the final proof of another of Jean's mad book ideas. But tonight we have her inaugural lecture with one of her frightening portmanteau titles, Collaborating with Communities, Communities Collaborating with Global Local Impact. Get it? The drift of which I wouldn't dare to describe. Let's leave that to Welsh Kiwi Professor Jean of Nursing, Jean Ross of Nursing. I invite you to tighten your seatbelts and prepare for the ride. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Leonie. Thank you, Sam. And thank you, Scott. And Scott has left us. I'm just having a sip of water. Okay, so that was a lovely introduction, Martin, and quite right. I can see people now, you know, they say, when I say, oh, I've had an idea, and they go, uh-oh. Okay. All right, so, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Croeso am byth, and welcome. You will note that there will be a slight cultural nuance to this session, and certainly at the end when we celebrate as well. So collaborating with communities, communities collaborating with local global impact is the focus of this presentation. It is my work, as you've heard. It's my work for the past 30 years. In fact, the work generally since I was about 12 or 13, when I started to understand about disparity and inequity. And I'll say a little bit more about that. Forming connections between communities is a key focus, whether that is between rural nurses or rural GPs, between nursing educators in many countries, and between learners and rural communities to enable mutually beneficial development. This is my motivation to address inequities in health, particularly as experienced by rural communities and rural nurses who practice in those communities. I've been working at Otago Polytechnic since 2003. I am a registered nurse, and I qualified in 1982. From the School of Nursing, from the Carnarvonshire and Anglesey Hospital, Bangor, North Wales, where it was a training. It was an apprenticeship type of education, and I was salaried. I therefore learnt on the job, and hell did I learn. It suited my hands-on guided experience by others. I learnt from them. I was mentored by them. This was accomplished through the traditional education for me, where great relationships were developed, as I was supported in my first this and my first that, and the nurses in the room will know what I'm talking about. My reflection on my traditional education assisted me to learn quick, ask questions, question and act. While all actions have consequences and therefore ethical vigilance and accurate assessment, treatment and management, planning, evaluation of impact and documentation was and still is paramount and continues to guide my practice to this day. I am aware. I constantly see things that need to be improved. I'm in the moment. I take opportunities I'm a risk taker, I'm creative, I understand and respect difference, I'm fair, I'm collaborative, I understand and I really want opportunities and go for them. I've got a can-do attitude. So how did I get here? I've applied myself, I've driven, I approached community research for a number of years, and this has informed my practice, looking at the future and for the improvement of the benefits of society. I hold a Bachelor of Nursing, a Master of Arts, and completed my doctorate in 2017. Thank you, Etienne, my supervisor, from the University of Otago, Department of Geography. From 1984 to 2003, as Martin said, I was the co-director of what was first the Centre for Oral Health, which then transferred to the National Centre for Oral Health. And I was instrumental in the development of the interdisciplinary postgraduate education and in a number of firsts research projects undertaken nationally in New Zealand on rural issues. And in 2008, I received the New Zealand Rural General Practice Network Peter Snow Memorial Award in recognition of my contribution to rural health care. Okay, Sam. Thank you. So what does my practice consist of? It consists of being evidence-based, it consists of being research active, of that research aligns and guides my teaching, and vice versa, my teaching aligns and questions myself about what research needs to be undertaken. Communities play a large, significant place in my practice, related to being place-based, but also to include the groups with common interests, which are not limited geographically, and in particular, research and practice and teaching are aligned together. It also means that I take leadership, and I've been a leader for many years, and with leadership comes being political. Okay, Sam? My interests are contexts, place and people, and in particular, rural contexts, and in particular, what actually happens in those rural contexts for those rural people. The rural population accounts for almost half of the total global population, a significant number of people globally. And people in rural areas often suffer more than their suburban and metropolitan counterparts due to lack of access to health care, which is in turn related to the lack of providers, including specialists, travel issues, and cost. Those living in rural areas are more likely to develop and succumb to heart disease, cancer, chronic lower respiratory disease and stroke, or die from unintentional injury. The infant mortality rate is higher amongst rural children, and life expectancies for men and women in isolated regions are less than those in their urban counterparts. Health disparities in New Zealand, in the New Zealand population, are associated with socioeconomic deprivation and poor health outcomes, including the incidence of mortality, hospitalizations, health risk factors, chronic disease, and many acute conditions. Life expectancy is similar for both rural and urban populations in New Zealand. However, there is a difference in life expectancy between Maori and non-Maori populations. Rural Maori have a shorter life expectancy than urban Maori, with 1.2 years difference for women and 1.5 years difference for men. Maori experience a higher rate of cancer, a higher incidence of obesity, and high rates of chronic illness stemming from obesity. Chronic illness, such as diabetes, coronary heart disease, stroke, and high blood pressure are also more common amongst Maori. According to the Rural Wonka, an active network of rural family doctors and rural academics from each of the world's regions, despite the huge differences between developing and developed countries, access is the major issue in rural health around the world. Even in countries where the majority of the population lives in rural areas, resources are concentrated in the cities. All countries have difficulties with transport and communication, and all face the challenge of a shortage of doctors and other health professionals in rural and remote areas. And we're hearing it every day in the media at the moment in New Zealand. Nurses make up the largest segment of the global healthcare profession and are in a position to play a critical role in reducing rural health disparities. Rural nurses need broad-based knowledge, a cradle-to-grave perspective on health, and to be committed to learning to work and collaborate in new models of health care. They must also be capable of working with the rural community to gather and analyse population-level data, promote wellness and disease prevention, assist in adapting and disseminating best practice for population health, and identify patients who are at greater risk of disparities, necessitating a greater outreach effort. This is the focus of this presentation and my work. Where nurses practice has been of interest to me. How they practice, why they practice the way they do, what can they change, adapt, what can they improve in their practice. I was very interested in rural nursing and their identity, which was the main area of my thesis for my PhD. The title of which, Place Matters to Rural Nurses, which means a lot to me, means a lot to understand place, the significance of place, and the three elements which I studied with social geography is location, locale, relationships are built, and sense of place. And that very much is part of nursing practice and my colleagues, rural GPs. So place is an important because it is central to the social world. And place occurs when meaning, naming, or the feeling of a connection occurs within that location. When space and place work together, they are more dynamic than working separately, and therefore the weaving of space and place and nursing's engagement with that place is revealed. Okay, Sam. I mentioned disparities, and I became quite aware of disparities in my young teens. This is where I'm from, this map, so you can see on here. I think I've got a clicker. Thank you. So you can see that I am... Oh. That's the elbow. Okay, so you can see I'm from this place here, Holyhead, which is an island off the main island. And it's isolated. It's got a largest population. It's a port town. And over on the other side, you can see that is the port. You can see the ship. That is the ship going from Holyhead to Ireland, which my father worked on as an engineer. And that is the view from my home, from the garden. That's where my mother still lives. And from that you would see that that's quite a picturesque picture. It's tranquil, it's nice. That was on a calm day. However, disparities. Those yachts in the harbour, the majority of which would be owned by people from England. That's how I noticed and I started to understand about inequity and disparity. Thank you. The title of this is Research Before Research. The first piece of research I ever did was in 1988. I was a registered nurse, a staff nurse, and I was undertaking a research course as part of my ongoing development, and part of that was to undertake a piece of research. I was the charge nurse of the hematology oncology ward, and I was particularly interested in patients receiving chemotherapy and nausea and vomiting. I also was a very sickly traveller, and I used C-bands. Do you remember C-bands? 3 fingers from the wrist, put it on the spot there, put the dot on the spot, or the pressure point on the spot on both, and alleviate nausea and vomiting. And I thought, well, that would be a very good research project that I could undertake. Yes, so I undertook that. My first understanding about this was that when you give instruction to people, i.e. your colleagues, you need to tell them every single thing. So I would do the making sure that the pressure point was still on the right place on an hourly basis or 2 hourly basis, but I wasn't there at night. And so I said to my colleagues, the night staff, would you check every so often, please? And I had ringed where the little pressure point goes, so we knew where it was. Every time I went to check, I kept the pressure on and just checked. I omitted to ask that of the night staff. So every time they went to check, they lifted it up. And so the person felt sick immediately. And so I learned quite a lot about that. But that made me very interested in research. It made me interested in how things can make a difference and how I could make a difference. Now, one of the little aspect of that was I was coming to New Zealand on holiday, and I got in touch with the company who produced C-bands, and I said, I've done this piece of research, I'd like to go and share it in New Zealand. Would you be willing to contribute to my air flight? And they said yes, they gave me £500. That was in 1988, or no, 2000, 1990. Anyway, that's that story. That got me interested in research, how I could make a difference. And that's why I've called it Research Before Research. Okay, thanks. The next one is the story of nursing in rural contexts. And you've heard about that from Leonie and from Martin, so I won't overstretch this. I don't know what the time is at all.
6 o'clock.
Okay. Now, these are my colleagues. There's 15 of them. As Martin and I set up the Centre for Health, we were contracted by then the Southern Regional Health Authority, and we were contracted to, it was about quality, and Martin's explained that the quality that we were focusing on was the welfare of rural GPs and rural nurses and education. The Southern Regional Authority contracted me in the end of 1995, to undertake the first piece of research about, and they called it rural practice nurses of the South Island. And I put a survey together, and I surveyed my these colleagues all around the South Island. Very good response rate, very good data, which blew your mind away. What these people would do, what these nurses were doing, how little training they had to do what they were doing, and the isolation that they were experiencing. And so over the summer, 1995 to 96, I did a South Island tour. Got in the car, I had my daughter, who was 4.5. I had Kirsi from Helsinki, a student exchange, and we went round the South Island. She looked after Catherine, while I went to interview all the nurses again, and I said, what do you want? And they said what they wanted from an education. And I brought that information back and put together recommendations for the Southern Regional Health Authority, and they accepted them all. One of those was to support these rural nurses, and that's when I developed the Rural Nurse National Network, was to provide an education that was specifically for them, for rural, the first in New Zealand. And there's a third part, and I can't remember what that was. And so I set to, by putting this course together, which was the first for the University of Otago. It came out of the Centre for Postgraduate Nursing Studies in Christchurch. It was a certificate of proficiency. None of the nurses that you see there had an undergraduate degree, and they were doing their first 800 level course. Certificate of proficiency, there were some things that had to be put in order for that to happen. And that's right, the Southern Regional Health Authority funded it. So they paid the university course fees. And the 15 nurses from the South Island, you'll see them there, some of you may know them, from Stewart Island all the way up to Culverden. Jan, you will know some there, the Rose is there. They enjoyed it, but what the main thing was, they came together for the first time. And not only were they there for an education to upskill them, they were there to talk with each other and to connect and understand rural practice for the first time. And they are lifelong friends. So we had set up a nursing education. Part of that was the first time that primary response in medical emergency, was offered. It's offered to nurses and doctors, but the nurses in this course, they were the first to do it. And Trevor's here. So thank you, Trevor. Trevor designed, put Prime together, and he's the brains behind that. And so therefore, we now had advanced health assessment, Prime trained, guidelined, organised group of nurses, rural nurses in the South Island. And we went from strength to strength. I presented that at a conference, at the Rural GP Network conference, in Dunedin, strangely enough. And as I finished my presentation and I was walking down the corridor, not the corridor, but between the chairs, this gentleman came up and he said, "This is my card, you need to get in touch with me." And that was John Holmes. And John, you're here tonight. So thank you, John, as well. These have made a difference. And as Martin has said, we've worked together for nearly 30 years. And we've made significant difference along the way. And I can see by the faces that are here that this is still ongoing. And this is very, very real to my work, and which has contributed to me in this position that I have received as a professor. Thank you. But where does that take us? It takes us to politics. And you'll see here, this is the Kaitiaki Journal. You'll see on that is 2003. Those pictures were at a conference. You'll see that's Annette King. There is Wende Finlayson, she used to be here. Marion Litchfield, who I've worked for a long time, and that's the back of me at the top. Now, in the other picture there, you will see myself and Annette King talking. And what are we talking about? I'm thanking her for her listening to the needs of rural nurses. They were being promoted as the nurse practitioners of New Zealand, but they couldn't get away from practice. They needed to maintain their practice and they wanted to become nurse practitioners. When I moved here in 2003 from Christchurch, University of Otago, 48 of the nurses that had completed the postgraduate diploma of primary rural healthcare also came here to finish their masters, of which some of them completed the nurse practitioner pathway. Now, they found it very difficult to take time off to complete the tasks of becoming a nurse practitioner. And so Marty Peppers from Stewart Island and Deborah said, what we need a year's release time. They mentioned that to me and I said, we'll write a letter to the Honourable Damien O'Connor, who was the Rural Minister of Affairs, and we wrote a letter and that moved things on. And this is Annette at this conference announcing $240,000 to support a number of nurses, rural nurses, to become nurse practitioners. The politics doesn't stop. It continues. I found with politics, sometimes the door gets closed in your face, then you go through the side door or the back door, and when that happens, you go through the window, but you continue. And that's where trust, respect, and integrity of the positions that I have held over the last number of years continue, because of people can rely. They can rely on me. Okay, Sam, thank you. So we move on to community development. So the story of community development research leading to reducing health disparities And that's the CHASE model that Martin mentioned. It was developed in 2017 by Laurie Mahoney, who's here, and Josie Crawley, and it was much simpler at that time. But we developed the CHASE, and we're now going to have an interview that Sam did with myself and Mawera from Whakatane about a community development project that students undertook and completed this year, and Sam interviewed us both. Thanks, Sam.
So, as I said before the break, you have this year, you've used the CHASE model in Whakatane. How did that come about?
Through introductions through yourself, Sam, with Mawera, and our conversations about Mawera's interest in being part of the book that we are publishing next year in relation to CHASE, and the case studies that we are including in that. I had discussed with Mawera last year, would she be interested in the students or the learners, undertaking a community project in 2022, because I knew it would be an excellent project. It would be a different project, again, a virtual project, but one very much, focused on our Indigenous population in New Zealand. The thing was, I had to do a quick phone call, and Mawera was obliging. We were supposed to be working with Bishop's Castle in rural Shropshire in February, but because of COVID and the whole medieval village having COVID, and our stakeholder, our core team member having COVID himself, but also having dislocated his ankle, he was not in a good space. So he says, can't do it. So I quickly thought, Mawera, one phone call. Yes, she said, no problem. Come on up, if we could virtually. So that's how this happened.
So, Mawera, how did it, once you got past that phone call, what happened next?
Then it was just a matter of coordinating times and diaries, and I got the opportunity to meet with all of the learners who were involved in the project, and they just started firing questions. So we had a few group sessions, lots of messages. We worked out Messenger was going to be the best way to get me, because that's my most responsive communication. So they sent me messages on Messenger from each of the different groups. I might get a message asking a question about this area or that area of health. And what blew me away was the depth of interest and the depth of the questions. Like, these guys actually give a damn. It wasn't just an assignment. You could see there was a real, genuine empathy and a genuine wanting to make a difference for this community that has suffered and suffered and suffered some more. And I really appreciated it, so much so that I've actually just now sent a message a few minutes ago to Penny Henare, who is the Minister for Māori Health, asking him for the best address for him, and I'll send him a copy of the report, because I think, like with these new Māori health authorities that are being established in places like Whakatane, where rural health is such an issue, this is going to give him an insight that I don't think he's going to get from any other report that lands on his desk, actually, because there's so much care gone into it. It's more than just a job. This is the empathy of those training nurses in action, and I really loved that.
So Mawera, the CHASE model is part of clinical practice of those learners. So it's not theoretical, although it's based on theory, but it is theory in practice. So it's the CHASE model in action. Yeah. So it is part of their clinical, it's part of their community practice, but they are not only are they assessing and they're thinking critically, they are also building up the tools that they have been given, i.e. how to undertake an assessment, yes, of a client, but you were our client, the community was our client. And so there are different assessment frameworks and models in which to guide them to do that. And so therefore they can come up with an assessment of identified health needs, which they came back to you with, didn't they?
They
do you agree with these?
Yes, and that's what I really loved, and that's what I could see. I could see where the empathy was. There was so much care, in their recommendations. There was so much care in the questions they asked, and do you know what? What I really loved about it was a really mana enhancing process that was incredibly respectful of this community. There are a lot of things in this community that we could all point to and go, it's their fault that that's happening to them and all the rest of it. But there was none of that. There was no judgment. There was just real care for the people in this community. We need more of that.
So we've talked about community, and we've talked about community in New Zealand. But also my work is also international as well, and the CHASE model is being utilised in the USA, in England, in Australia. My next protocol is to work back home in Holyhead with a group of students, and hopefully that will happen next year. But to undertake these projects, it is a matter of building relationships with stakeholders before you actually start the project with the students. Iceland are also undertaking, they don't use CHASE, but they use something very similar. And when I was in Iceland, I don't know how many years ago, was it now? Three years ago? I made contact with the nursing school there and was introduced to the students that were undertaking community development projects as well. So what's quite nice is that myself in New Zealand, Australia and the UK, we were able to get a grant from the GRNEN, which is the Global Rural Nurse Exchange Network, of which I'm one of the founders, and were able this year to develop a collaboration together with student nurses, both in Australia and New Zealand, connecting together, understanding, utilising the CHASE, and working with the UK, with the Bishop's Castle in the UK, on mental health and youth. Thank you. And so what I'm going to show now is from that work, we also, La Trobe Rural Health School and myself put in for another grant, and it is one where we have taken the CHASE model, we've bumped it into what's called in the Moodle cloud to be available to all students, and at this moment we're just adapting it so it will be available for community people as well if they want to undertake their own community development. So here is an animation that's been produced about CHASE. Yep, week phases.
CHASE concerns 9 phases. In this part of the course we will discuss Phase 1 and Phase 2 and consider how they are integrated into community practice. Phase 1 commences with the planning stage to undertake the community assessment associated with the identified rural geographical location. This is guided by an adapted version of Anderson and McFarlane's Community as Partner Wheel, which enhances the collecting of data to identify the demographics of the community through the 8 subsystems associated with the wheel. These subsystems include the physical environment, education, safety and transportation, health and social services, politics and government, communication, economics, and finally, recreation. This wheel has been adapted by Ross et al. To include a further 3 subsystems, which brings this community as partner assessment into the reality of social, political, and ecological issues evidenced in today's society. These 3 additional subsystems are COVID-19, climate change and housing. Secondary data is gathered, followed by gathering primary data with stakeholders from the identified community and asking specific questions to complete the assessment. As all of this data is collected, the learners are able to identify issues through engaging with a SWOT analysis, which involves the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats related to the community. This then leads to identifying the health needs in relation to the population or demographics of the community and leads us into phase 2 of the CHASE model. In this phase, it is necessary to generate collaboration and agreement by all members, including the community stakeholders, the learners and the facilitators, upon the identified health need and corresponding identified population group. The identified health need and population group associated with the rural community form the basis of the research and lead us into phase 3 of CHASE, reviewing the health need. You have now completed this video. Please continue on with the content for these 2 phases.
So that's a bit of a teaser, and then we'll go straight away into phase 8 and 9. That's at the end, so we're starting at the beginning and the end, and there's the middle part, but we won't worry about that because I just want to demonstrate to you how we engage the learners in this as well.
In this video, we will look at phases 8 and 9 of the CHASE model. In phase 8 you will see from the CHASE model that this is dedicated to COVID-19. This was a time during 2020 and 2021 when the CHASE model was significantly adapted to accommodate ongoing community development projects in a time of significant upheaval, both in New Zealand and internationally, with lockdowns being put in place. This required the CHASE model to be adapted so the community development projects could continue through a virtual medium in consultation with the identified communities, including the stakeholders and student nurse learners. As lockdown became more paramount within New Zealand, undertaking community development projects became a virtual engagement, which means that the community development projects with which the students engaged with were held at a virtual distance, and similarly the students themselves engaged with each other virtually. This meant a significant change both to the CHASE model and to the learners' learning and teaching pedagogy. We realized we are in an opportunistic perspective to work virtually with communities and virtually from each other as a team. Phase 9 relates to the acknowledgement of learners working alongside and with communities, either face-to-face or virtually. This work or practice underpinned by CHASE recognizes the learner's contribution to community development. Therefore, at the completion of the community development project, learners receive a micro-credential endorsed in one of the Sustainable Development Goals from the educational institution and can refer to their own practice as a community development practitioner as stated by the International Association for Community Development, the IACD. You have now completed this video. Please continue on with the content for these 2 phases.
Thank you. So I think you can see that the work that we're doing, and my colleagues are sitting here as well, is about not just, it's about really what can we do for learners, what can we do for communities, how can we make a difference, and what is the impact that we undertake. And so the other part of this is phase, in the phase 8 and 9, is about the impact that what the students have developed, the health promotion messages, the resources they've developed, particularly for that demographic group in that rural community, what impact that actually has. Okay, so this is the work that's ongoing. This is community development local to global, so from what we've been doing here locally to globally, and so as you see it does say community development practitioners. We work with the CHASE model or adapted version. We design in collaboration or co-design with communities. We have a credentialing which you see there. We have an education system that is linking with GRNEN, Global Rural Nurse Exchange Network, and for next year is to develop what we call is the GRACE Centre, which is the global, I can't remember. It's not rural, it's not responsive, global responsive something. I can't remember. Anyway, it's to do with sustainability, and it's to do with a global centre to recognise sustainability and community education. All right, Sam, thanks. And so Martin mentioned Tryfan, strangely enough. My mountain in Wales is my inspiration. Granite, hard granite, difficult to climb up. You walk up, but you have to use your hands. Every single person uses your hands. And over on the other side, that sits on the top of Tryfan, and it's two massive stones called Adam and Eve. And if you're brave enough, and Martin has, you jump from one to the other, but on the other side is a sheer cliff. I can't even get up it. All right, nearing the end. So what is to the ongoing and future developments? This is work about sustainability. It is something that Sam and I, with a group of others from around New Zealand, with Te Pukinga, are looking at a transdisciplinary, sustainable education of higher education. It is something that I'm particularly interested in for myself, which is to move the Chase model on, to bring our research focus together, and to work in a sustainable with a sustainable focus. So that's our future work, isn't it, Sam? And then lastly, just to bring you forward to where I am at the moment, which I can't read this at all, but it says something like, no, we don't want that one. We're moving on, we're going to that one now. There, okay. So what am I doing at the moment? As Martin alluded to, there is the National Rural General Practice book that will be published within the following month, which we are editing, so we were commissioned to do that by the Rural GP Network. There is an International Springer book that we're lucky enough to get a contract for, and Sam and I are the editors with my cousin Keith from Bishop's Castle. You'll see connections here. And we have 18 authors for that book, ranging from Jessie Whitehead, a social geographer from Waikato, to international people. Cindy's in the book. Laurie's definitely in the book. I don't want to miss anybody out. Claire's in the book. I don't want to miss anybody out. Please, please, no. There's 18 of us. Okay. Impact research reports. We just completed an impact on the resources that the students develop, and I mentioned that, but this year we also championed the last 5 years of all our graduates as to how the Chase model, or when they undertook their project over the past 5 years, has that had any implications to their current practice as a registered nurse. And thank you, Laurie, for doing that data analysis with us. Publications, and I'm a peer reviewer. I have a number of DPP students, one PhD students, and Liz is here today. Very much focus on sustainability, teaching, and, as Leonie mentioned, the Scope Journal, as well as the blog, the Health Discourse blog, which I work with Leslie Gill, I think Leslie's here, and Leslie Brooke. We are focusing on sustainability, the 17 sustainable goals with that, and we will be finished that by the end of the year. And so, without further ado, thank you, Sam. Thank you to where I'm from. 365 steps down to the lighthouse, 365 steps up. Sunday afternoon walk after Sunday roast. Every Sunday. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jean. It was a pleasure being able to sit and watch the whirlwind and know that I didn't have to do much for it this time. Both Martin and Leonie talked about Jean's ability to ensnare other people in her research and in research to benefit other people. There was a time about 6 months ago when Jean came and said, "It's so exciting, I've got you a new radio show to do." I said, "I already do 2 radio shows." "Oh yes, but this one is for the Global Rural Nursing Exchange Network. We're going to do a world tour." And so that's why I find myself talking to people in Tanzania at 6 o'clock in the morning, or to people in the prairies of Canada, talking about rural nursing and trying to understand how people work in that rural rural and remote nursing, and how people care for their communities. And to have Jean on the background whispering questions to ask. And then she said, "And we're writing a book." And so now we're writing a book, and Springer is publishing said book. So Leonie wanted me to talk about what Jean brings to the professoriate. And I think that one of the things that, particularly for a Polytechnic professor, is that things are indistinguishable. The teaching, the research in the community, and the impact are not things that you do on different days. They're not even things you do on different minutes. These things are the same. And Jean really embodies that. The work that she is doing covers all of those things and has impact in all of those things. And so just before I ask if there's any questions, as part of the book, we've done we're looking at following up with some of the nurses that have done the Chase project over the last 5 years. And we've also been looking at following up with the communities to find out what impact that they've had. And yes, the communities are certainly benefiting from it, not just in terms of the specific resources that have been developed, but just from the process of being involved is having quite transformational impacts on those communities. It's quite remarkable. And one of the things we've done is followed up on those nurse graduates, now they're practitioners. And Laurie's been analysing that. I'll just read you a couple of the comments that students, graduates have sent back. "The Chase project has influenced my perception of how much power a nurse has to make positive change within a community. Nurses aren't just working in hospital wards, they are also out in the community engaging in higher level change processes and development." Another one, sorry for the people that work in wards here. "I never felt I wanted to be the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. I attribute the Chase project for my desire to be a nurse who leads and drives change in the New Zealand healthcare system." And we've got loads and loads of those sorts of comments. And that can be put down to the impact that Jean has had. So thank you, Jean. Thank you, Jean. Just like to thank Scott for the welcome, and Martin for the introduction, and everybody for coming along tonight.